Welcome to The Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Jared Redick. Jared is the Assistant Dean for Ballet at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. We're going to discuss his experience as a dancer, and particularly a dancer with an injury, and what he learned from that experience, and how he helps other injured dancers return to ballet. But first, a word from our sponsor, locumstory.com. Locumstory.com is a free, unbiased educational resource about locum tenens. It's not an agency. Locum Story answers your questions on their website, podcast, webinars, videos, and they even have a Locums 101 crash course. Learn about locums and get insights from real-life physicians, PAs, and NPs at locumstory.com. And now to my guest, welcome Mr. Jared Redick.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Dr. Wilner.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Well, first, I'm kind of interested in ballet, and I've watched a few ballets, and it just looks incredibly hard. Some sports, football, I used to play touch football, but it would never even occur to me to do ballet. It just looks hard. So why ballet? Why dance?
Well, for me, it's kind of been a lifelong pursuit. I'm a third generation ballet dancer. So my grandmother was a prima ballerina in Hungary. She escaped with my mom during the Hungarian Revolution, 1956. They came over here to the US and started a ballet school, and then I started training with my mom. So from my earliest recollection and memories, both my older brother and I, we started in the studio. Every day we would be in the classroom. Either maybe we're just sitting there playing, but then later as we got older, we started taking classes and we got more serious as we got older, and I found a real affinity for it. The physicality of it, the intellectualization of movement, all kinds of things were really attractive to me. And of course, as I moved into my career, those just kept expanding.
Wow, so it was like water for you. It was
Yeah.
you just woke up and there it was, but you didn't fight it. It seemed to suit you. What kind of I don't know what kind of career does a ballet dancer have?
So usually for ballet dancers, both male body and female body, we're really talking about you start into the profession at about 17 to 21. That's when you're hired into a company usually. We don't normally, ballet dancers don't normally go to college and then join a company, even though that's becoming more normalized now because directors understand that a more well-rounded and emotionally mature dancer is a better hire, makes more sense for them. So, but there's lots of entry points there. So usually you start late teens, early 20s, and then if you're lucky, you have about a 20-year career. And a lot of people, a lot of dancers, they train so hard when they're very young, maybe from 10 or 15 all the way up, that they get into their mid 20s and they decide this is not the path for me. I've done the things that I wanted to do. And now I want to move on and have a different career in a different field. So a 20-year career is a really, it's an excellent length of time, just like any professional athlete, right? You look at football players, you look at certainly gymnasts, which are a little bit, obviously going to be a little bit less than that. Basketball, you name it, any kind of sport, the body, the wear and tear on the body, there's a clock is ticking with that.
Right, which I guess would be a legitimate reason not to take a 4-year chunk of
Yeah.
college, right, out of your sort of main physical years. I could see that how that's got to be balanced. You don't want to just stop and then well, I'm sure you couldn't stop for 4 years. You'd have to dance at least in the morning, and that would be your sport, I guess, in college,
Well,
right?
well, for us, where I teach at UNCSA, University of North Carolina School of the Arts, we have high school and college program, and so the kids who come into our program, we're a conservatory program, so they're training rigorously while they're doing, excuse me, their liberal arts classes. So they are maintaining and improving and getting ready to pursue a career in dance. Obviously, some dancers Some of our students go on to have professional careers. Some decide that they want to go and get a master's in something completely different. But certainly you can take that 4 years, and there are a number of programs across the world that you can continue to train at that level and still pursue it professionally. So it's not like you're just taking an off ramp and no dance, and then, maybe we're going to get back on when we're finished. But the dancers who want to pursue it, for some dancers, it makes a lot of sense that taking an extra 4 years to train before they move into the profession is helpful.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Plus, they have something to fall back on. One of the things we're
Mm.
going to talk about today is injuries. For professional, I think I read the statistic for professional football players that the average, there's a few outliers, but the average is 3 years
Yeah.
before they're bumped out because of injuries.
Mhm.
And hopefully one hopes to last longer, like some famous quarterbacks, but ballet dancers are always landing on their toes, it seems. I know that I know a ballet dancer here in town who teaches because she says her knee is all beat up, and she's quite young. So tell us about your experience with injury.
Well, my personal experience with it is I was relatively uninjured throughout my career. However, I did suffer a significant injury at the beginning. I'd been in a company for 2 years. I was out in San Francisco Ballet, and I tore my ACL on my left knee. So that's a significant injury. I went up, I did a big jump, came down, landed wrong. There goes the ACL. So that took me about 6 months to a year to rehab and to get back on my feet and be able to perform again. That process was really challenging. And I think when we're talking about injuries such as that really derail your physical movement ability, it's not just the physicality of it, it's the emotional impact that it takes on you, the toll that it takes on you, because suddenly your entire world shifts in that one moment. You get an injury, and then everything has to change. And so, and then the recovery time is significant. If you're talking 2, 3, 4, 6 months of recovery, that is a long time to kind of shift the paradigm within your own life. So I know I struggled during that time period, but I was fortunate that I was a young man. I was determined to get back up and get my body healthy and return to the stage. Now looking at it retrospect, I would approach it slightly differently. In many ways. And that would be probably healthier for me, but I got through it. Injuries are definitely a challenge, but they're also part and parcel of doing anything professionally that has physicality involved in it.
I'm curious, what would you do differently?
So it's very, coming at it from where I am now versus when I was a teenager. I was 19 when it happened. Actually, no, sorry, it was 21 when it happened. I would if I had the emotional maturity at the time, I would make sure that I had a really good team of people around me. And I don't mean just doctors and physical therapists, but also emotional support there. And I would really reach out to my mentors and to my colleagues to help me through that process. And that is the hardest thing to do because you're in a vulnerable situation when
Mm.
you're injured. You're so vulnerable physically and emotionally, mentally, intellectually, all these things, you take a hit to yourself. So I think now there's always such an urge to like get back up and go, 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 go. Now I would look at it and go, this is a moment for me to sit back and be reflective and just trust that your body is going to heal because we don't know that when you start the process. You don't know
Mm.
what you're going to be on the other side. And just be more reflective and mindful as I go through that process. And of course, having those emotional support or any kind of support around me would be helpful, right? If you're so fortunate to have access to that kind of support.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you're 21 and something like that happens, I mean, did you say, "Oh, let's just forget it. God's talking to me. I'm on the wrong path. I'm going to go be an accountant or something." Did that occur to you?
There was never a moment at that moment in time that I thought that. I was like, this is just a really big inconvenience to me right now. And I'm just too stubborn to just give it up right now. I'm just starting. So I really wanted to get my body back in shape, get it healthy, healed, and then get back on the stage. That's just what I wanted to do at that moment, which I imagine a lot of professional athletes or collegiate athletes probably feel the same. You have an injury, you're like, nope, I'm still doing this. I really love what I do, and I have a good time doing it. So I need to do what I need to do to make sure that I can return fully and hopefully better.
Well, I think that's a key. This that sort of single-minded determination without doubt kind of makes things a little bit easier. You know, when people are struggling, say in medical school, sometimes there are students, and they're struggling to pass, and maybe I don't want to do this at all. Boy, that makes it 10 times harder, right? Once you know this is what I'm doing and I'm going to get through this, then you sort of get all that out of the way. So, in your bio, you mentioned that you work with other dancers who have injuries. How does that happen?
So now in my current job, I'm the assistant dean. I also teach full time students from high school all the way through college, undergrads. So it is normal for us to have dancers injured throughout the year. Hopefully nothing nearly as severe as what I went through with an ACL tear. That's significant. But we have a wellness center. We have doctors and we have physical therapists. But we have to get our dancers when they're injured. We have to, really monitor what they're doing in the recovery situation. So we might, like in my classes, I make sure that those dancers who are injured, like I modify, I give them, I say, well, this is what you need to do today. Just do this much.
Hmm.
And then you're going to have a seat. Maybe you take notes. Maybe hopefully you do your physical therapy exercises in the classroom while the class is going on. And that seems to be very beneficial to them. But now we're talking about that emotional piece. Now I try to make sure that I'm available to them to talk about whatever it is that's on their mind. Because that process, when you're injured and you feel like, I think we all feel like we've failed in some respect when we are injured, especially athletes. We figure that there is something that we did wrong, and now we're injured and we can't pursue it. So I think helping them through those places emotionally is helpful. And again, I'm not a counselor, but just to be a person that they can talk to about certain things, right? You want to certainly have conversations that are appropriate, but also we have to understand these aren't just dancers or athletes, they are human beings. And navigating that landscape can be very challenging.
Well, as someone who has lived through it, you have a lot of credibility, for one thing. And of course, you have a lot of experience and have seen, this repeatedly with different people and how they deal with it. But I think you have to emphasize, though, that the dancers are exceptional people to begin with, that these are people who are highly motivated.
Mhm.
And you can imagine you've got a 20-year-old and they're training for the nutcracker, right? And it's October and they slip and fall and sprain their ankle and they're stuck. And it's like, gee, I'm counting the days to my big performance. I'm letting everybody else down. I'm not going to be able to shine the way I've worked my whole life to be in this perform. I might get cut because I'm not going to be able to do it. I mean, I think if you're so focused on success, which you have to be to perform at that level, that's kind of devastating emotionally.
Yeah, you're exactly right with all of those things. You hit the timeline right, you hit the ballet right. It's exactly what it is. And some of those dancers who are more significantly injured, we'll have them as assistants when we're doing rehearsals. So they'll be with us. They'll take notes for us. They'll help us move through the rehearsals in terms of as we're directing those rehearsals. So we try to keep them engaged and look at the injury as a temporary off ramp where they can maybe learn different skills and kind of look at the art form in a different way at that moment.
Yeah, so I think keeping them engaged as you're doing rather than, home watching TV is definitely going to be helpful to them. Have you had any issue, as just kind of a side note,
Hmm.
with opioid dependence, chronic pain? Is that something that comes up or you're able to work around that?
I've not had any experience with any of the dancers I've worked with over I don't know how many years. So that is not something that I've experienced. which is fortunate. Dancers, you said it, dancers are very driven. They're very focused. They're very self-disciplined. And you also have to understand these are young people. These are very young adults that are entering the profession, that are training. And so it's very admirable what they do.
Oh, yes. What about art or the arts
Mhm.
as therapy? So you've got a sprained ankle or something worse, listening to music. You're keeping them involved in, I'd say that is a therapeutic maneuver for sure. So that there's, even though they're not actually dancing in the role that they want to be, they're still in a role within the greater project. Um, do you use the arts in any other way therapeutically?
Well, I think when you're talking about ballet dancers or dancers in general, we've been focusing, been talking really about the dancers as athletes, but primarily they're artists. And so when you're talking about creating art and individual artists, you have to think we have to train the whole person, the whole individual. So connecting the arts into that conversation would go something along the lines of anything that they are experiencing in their lives that will inform the art that they are able to produce with their bodies. And that goes for everybody. It doesn't have to be a dancer, right? What informs and our lived experience on a daily basis. And the arts are so magical for that. When, go to a museum and see paintings from whatever era, that might inspire you to feel a different way or give you a different insight into your own life. There's numerous stories and TED Talks and videos about people going to a concert and hearing music and it brings them back to a certain period and, from a different part of their lives. And that informs and helps them maybe move through some things that are
Mm.
challenging for them. So we always turn to the arts, right? When things are tough, we turn to the arts. What happened during COVID? We went to streaming. We watched a lot of Netflix. We watched a lot of programs because that gave us some comfort in our lives during that period where there was a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen next. So we tend to turn to the arts at any moment.
Let me ask you for a minute to teach us a little bit of ballet because in my mind, you're learning to do a particular maneuver and jump as high and as far. Um, I I don't see where the personal style that you're talking about, the emotion, uh, how is that attached or imbued into the move itself that would make dancer A, who can perform the maneuver perfectly, and dancer B, who can also do it perfectly, that it would look different when I watch them?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really is a great question. Like, what makes a great artist, right? Because we do these very, rote exercises, right? We have this methodology of training that builds the physique and trains the coordinations that are needed. But that's only the first part of it. Now we're talking about being able to communicate something, really authentically communicate from the inside out to the audience. Go across the fourth wall when you're in a theater or even if you're on film, you have to get through the camera, through the lens, break that fourth wall. So how we train that, obviously there's lots of there's nuances and there's techniques, but I use a lot of imagery when I start coaching. I do it when I'm teaching a daily class, but when I start coaching, we use a lot of imagery, like do this step that feels this way or that way. And so instead of telling them exactly how to, move their body through space, I give them the latitude to explore what that imagery means to them because we interpret language. Everyone interprets language and music
Hmm.
very differently. So that's where the artistry is going to come into things. Obviously, it's in a lot of the big classical ballets, the big narrative classical ballets like Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, Romeo and Juliet. Those are big, lush, sweeping scores. And the music really does help the dancers find their own authenticity within that musical landscape. So I encourage them to use the music to find their own path with the steps that they're given. And so they can interpret it, right? Dancers are generally interpretive artists. They are given material and then they interpret it however they want to. I'm not talking about choreographers who would be creative artists who create their own steps. We're just talking about generally dancers. They're given material, then they have to learn it and then turn it around and make it authentically their own.
Since I have an expert, one more technical question, and we're going to get back to
Absolutely.
healing. So, why does every ballet company do the Nutcracker?
Well, I mean, I mean, you're asking the question, right? I mean, we're talking about the business model, really. We're talking about nonprofits in the United States, and the Nutcracker is so important financially to an arts institution, especially ballet companies. So you have that, and it's also a holiday tradition. Everyone brings their kids to the Nutcracker, so companies do it every year. It is so important financially, but also as a community builder as well. I know that here at University of North Carolina School of the Arts, it is the biggest production we do every year. We have 15,000 people from across the community come and see the performance. So it plays a really relevant and valuable role for our whole community.
All right, now back to healing.
Yes.
Any experience with dance as therapy itself? We use movement, for example, patients with Parkinson's disease, for example, have trouble walking, but it turns out sometimes with music, they can actually dance. They can't walk, but they can dance. Is there any aspect of what you do that sort of overlaps with dance as therapy?
I don't currently teach those classes, but there are lots of classes around the United States that have been developed for students with Parkinson's, with Down syndrome. They're movement classes, right? They're movement-based classes. A lot of ballet companies have these classes available. So if you're a listener and you suffer from that, or have a family member or friend, you can just reach out to some of these larger dance institutions because they do have classes that are very helpful for people who suffer from those conditions.
Movement. So I guess ballet dancers enjoy what they do, right?
You'd hope so. Yes, it's very hard. So,
I mean, it
you
looks
know,
so hard that, gee, I guess there must be some fun in there. Do you think, is it like a runner's high? I mean, is there some, do you think it's a neurochemical thing, or why do you feel good, you know, landing on your toes 20 feet later?
it's a great question. I mean, it really, there's so much enjoyment to be able to move through space to music. You look at a child, you turn on music when they're just able to, walk, crawl, whatever, they will just start dancing. It's just part of the human condition. We naturally respond to that. And so if we're talking about ballet, which is such a formalized methodology in terms of movement, it's just the same thing. It just expanded to a higher level as we get older. And I personally loved the physicality of it. I love the intellectual challenge that I found when I was dancing. I like to explore artistically and emotionally what each role would be. And
Hmm.
if you've done the same role year after year, it's like I'm not the same person I was last year. There's so many things that have gone on in my life, so I come to that role with a different interpretation this year, even though the steps are the same. But my point of departure has suddenly shifted because my life has shifted. So I think dancers come to it because it's the physical challenge of it, but also the artistic challenge of it. It's just what a great opportunity for anyone who can dance or wants to dance.
Going to take a little bit of a different tack based on your experience with your own injury and the sort of regular recurrent injuries that your students are going to have. It's just kind of part of, it's an expectation that it's going to happen to somebody, right, that semester. Um, what can physicians and other healthcare workers do to communicate better and to enhance healing?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about that, it is really all about communication. When it's that moment where you have an injury and you're derailed from your life. Physicians and healthcare workers, any way that they can help their patients through more communication and giving them more guidance, the better. And obviously, every patient's going to be different. I'm very lucky. I've got an app that I can reach my doctor which is very helpful. So I can message them if I have issues wherever I am. But I think when you're going through an injury, the more communication, the more guidelines you can give them or possibilities, that's going to really help someone through that process because you really feel once you're injured, you kind of like you bump to the sidelines and you no longer feel like you're on the highway anymore, right? You know you're sitting on the sidelines waiting. So healthcare workers, the more they can communicate and give empathetic feedback is greatly, greatly appreciated, especially for young people. We know they're younger, they're developing, they're trying to figure out who they are, and can be scary for any age, any age.
Yeah, and the nice thing about young people is they tend to heal. They tend to get
True.
better. Well, this has been great, Jared. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I just really I appreciate being here. I appreciate talking about this. Injuries are such an important part of any kind of physical endeavor, and it's part and parcel for dancers. You live with it your entire time you're dancing, and then I think that this conversation is very helpful. So I thank you for having me on and having such a great conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, Jared Redick. Thanks for joining me on The Art of Medicine. And now, a final thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com. Locumstory.com is a free, unbiased educational resource about locum tenens. It's not an agency. Locum Story exists to answer your questions about the how to's of locums on their website, podcast, webinars, and videos. They even have a Locums 101 crash course. At locumstory.com, you can discover if locum tenens make sense for you and your career goals. What makes locumstory.com unique is that it's a peer to peer platform with real physicians sharing their experiences and stories, both the good and bad, about working locum tenens. Hence the name, Locum Story. Locum Story is a self service tool that you can explore at your own pace with no pressure or obligation. It's completely free. Thanks again to locumstory.com for sponsoring this episode of The Art of Medicine. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time. This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on The Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com